Now, some of you are probably looking at the book so you know the answer, but if you're not, let me ask you, what shaped Gen Y? What did we talk about for the first part of the 2000s? If you're with me that it's this 11 to 15-year-old age period, when kids who are in their 20s today were 11 to 15 a decade ago, what were we talking about? Terrorism, right? 9/11. That was the topic of adult conversation. And so my argument would be the number one factor affecting Gen Y is terrorism. It's school violence, it's Columbine, Virginia Tech, World Trade Center. And the interesting thing about those events is that they're random. They happen inexplicably to anyone at any time. You can't predict it. It happens to people who have no discernible relationship to the issue being addressed. Now, if your fundamental mental model was that random stuff can happen tomorrow, how are you going to live your life? What do you think? Enjoy today. Exactly. And I would argue that's the number one characteristic of Gen Ys. They live in the moment. The key thing they ask is what I'm doing today meaningful, challenging, and preferably fun? That's what they ask every single morning. Are you asking me to do something meaningful, challenging, and fun? And so when we, old fogies, say, well, we want you to do this crummy job for 2 years and then we'll talk about something interesting, I mean, we're just kind of, it's like white noise. It's not even connecting on the brain cells of a Gen Y, because that's not what they're listening for. They're listening for the components of what's happening today. Ram said we have to listen to them and challenge them and question them. Absolutely right, because we've got to make today meaningful and challenging for that generation. Now, go ahead. You can say it. Well, nobody did that for me when I was that age. I had to carry the bag. I had to do the analytic grunt work. And my response to you would be kind of a Dr. Phil response of, how's that working for you? I mean, go ahead, stick to your old principles, but it's not going to work with this generation. And that's my point, is we need to just accept the reality of who these people are. And for good or for bad, we shape them by having them grow up in a world filled with terrorism and school violence. And so they are used to random events, and therefore they are very much in the here and now. They also are our first generation, of course, of what I call unconsciously competent users of digital technology. Most of us in the room learn to use digital technology consciously as adults. And what happens when you learn something consciously is you apply it to stuff you already know. So most of us probably use our digital technology to do fundamentally the same thing we've always done, faster or better. Unconscious learners invent new things. And here's one good example. Imagine that I want to get together with a friend for dinner. How would I go about that? How would I get together with a friend for dinner? What's the process? What'd I do? I'd call. I would, yes. When would I call? Way in advance. Now, here's the important part. What happens during the call? What do my friend and I get to after we get through all the niceties and stuff? What happens fundamentally in the call? We make a plan. Thank you. Yes, we agree on a time, a place, what we're going to do, maybe what we're going to wear. I mean, we make a plan. Hold that thought. What do the Ys do? Text, all right? When? I would argue the minute it occurs to them, in the moment, right? Here's the important part. What's in the text? Sup, okay? Good. I agree, yeah. It certainly would be some kind of goofy initials and so forth. But it would fundamentally, and I think sup is a very good one, I would have said where you. It would fundamentally be a request for coordinates. It would not be a plan. And so they would exchange coordinates, and at some point they would then begin a process kind of like ships with radar of homing in on each other until they end up at the same place, but they would never, during that process, plan. They would coordinate. I don't know how many of you have kids in this group and you've tried to drive them somewhere, but I can certainly remember driving with my son in the passenger seat, and I think I'm going to Johnny's house. He's texting and he goes, "Mom, Mom, they've all moved to Harry's." So I'm, wheeling around town like a nut trying to catch up with this roving band of children because there's no plan. We're just coordinating in real time. Now today, of course, they don't even have to text. They can just watch their friends' dots move around on their screen and know how to catch up with those particular friends. But they're fundamentally coordinators, and most of us older folks are planners. And there's another source of conflict in the workplace, because they show up and we say, "What's your plan?" They think, of course, that we are so constipated by our meetings and schedules and blah, we can't even do anything in a spontaneous way. We need to find the best of both. A couple other quick comments about this generation. They're not at all amazed that women can work. Chances are their mothers did. So can a woman be a CEO? Duh. Can a woman be a head of state? Yes. Can a woman work, 70 hours and rear kids? Mom might have done that. But here's the thing. Most of these guys don't want to do it. So I cannot tell you the number of senior women who've said to me, "My daughter has said, 'I love you, Mom, I admire you, Mom, and I don't want to lead the life you did.'" So again, family, flexibility, consideration of those issues is going to be tantamount if you want to hold and maintain talented people, I would say men and women, in this generation, just as it is for Xers for a slightly different reason. They grew up at a positive economic time, and they had parents who loved these little darlings to pieces. They've been the most pro-centric culture that we've seen, child-centric. As a result, this is a group that tends to be very immediate. They're confident. Most of them grew up eating off those red plates, "You are special today." They believe every word of it. Yes? Yes. So the question was first to live without the threat of nuclear holocaust, if indeed you do have that lack of threat. But the Soviet Union did collapse. It took away a lot of the attention that was paid by other generations to that, as you're very well pointing out. So just to touch on this, it's a very confident generation. I was going to say to you that I had a recruiting officer tell me that they spend hours, fine-tuning the requirements for positions, and yet fully half of the applicants don't have any of the stated requirements. I said, "Well, do you have kids?" She said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Did you ever say to your kids, 'You can do anything you set your mind to'?" She says, "I said it all the time." I said, "They're here." So this is a "you can do anything you set your mind to" generation, to our point about, do you need college? My son called me up his junior year and said, "Mom, I have a job." I said, "You have another year of college." And after some discussion, the long and short of it was he got the college degree, but the little stinker, when he walked across the stage, he picked up his diploma, walked right across, right up to me, handed it to me and said, "This is just for you, Mom. I don't need it." So that was his view about a college degree. They feel they can do anything because we've told them they can if they put their mind to it. It's a group that's tolerant and very close to their parents. I wanted to show you a little bit about this. It's a group that trusts authority. So they trust their parents, they trust their teachers, they trust the police, they're comfortable with senior executives. Many of you have probably discovered that. They are very close to their parents. 90% say they are very close. That contrasts with boomers. In a similar survey when boomers were teens, 40% of boomers said they'd be better off with no parents. So in that span, we've gone from 40% saying I'd be better off with no parents to 90% saying I'm very close to my parents. Anytime you read anything written by a boomer that starts out by saying, well, they're not behaving the way I did, throw it away. It's a ridiculous statement. Of course they're not behaving the way boomers did. Boomers didn't want parents. These guys love their parents. They will never leave. And it was the boomers who did it. So expect very tight relationships. I worked with one professional service firm a couple months ago where the senior partner told me that just the night before, he'd sat down with his engagement team to put together a final presentation for a client. And as they're putting it together, one of his bright young recruits, a Gen Y, said to him, "This isn't the way my dad thinks we ought to structure the presentation." And thought nothing of the fact that he had called home, discussed the client's problems with Dad. Dad had made some recommendations, and he was now bringing those forth with confidence and calm. And absolutely shocking, of course, the senior partner who was receiving. My point is, don't be surprised. It's just different. It's not right or wrong. And finally, let me say just a little bit about your kids. As I said, if you've got kids who are, I don't know, 16, 17-ish, who've been shaped basically since 2008, who've been 11 since 2008, you don't have Gen Ys. This generation, this next generation, has had a bucket of cold water dumped on their head. They're not the rosy Gen Ys that we've just been talking about. This generation knows about housing crisis, mortgage refinancing, global recessions. They know about energy shortages. They probably know more about carbon emissions and water shortages than any of us in this room do because they're studying it in school. They are a very different outlook on the world. They have not, by and large, been reared by boomers. Their parents tend to be those self-reliant Xers. And so they have very different attitudes. And of course, they've grown up with mobile technology. So not just digital, but here, right now. It's changed, among other things, their view of authority. Remember the days when a parent used to be smart, at least until the kid was like 12? That's not true today. I have parents tell me that even a 2-year-old will say, "Hey, Dad, you better Google that just to be sure." So even Dad's view of what the capital of the state is not taken for granted by a 2-year-old today, because they know right in the hip pocket is that magical device that could pull up a factual-based answer. Half of our 11-year-olds, by the time they go into this 11-year-old stage, half of them already have mobile phones. And for those of you who haven't seen a small child interact with an iPad, you must watch. It is the most fascinating thing. They do it intuitively. I've interviewed a number of grade school teachers who tell me the kids show up now for grade school, pick up physical books, and can't figure out why they can't get the pages to turn. So this intuitive reaction is very much part of who these guys are. This is going to be a group that's going to be much more conservative. I think actually it's a group that understands we live in a world of finite limits. If I had to pick one term here, I would pick finite limits. They think about how do we make the most of what's going on. And from a business model and a consulting, let me pull it toward your clients. I think the big issue for companies is going to be these people do not want to spend capital. They don't want to buy houses. They don't particularly want to buy cars. They don't even care about owning a bicycle. They're happy to rent. This is a generation of renters. And so the exciting business opportunities of the future are going to be business opportunities that allow you to share capital goods. I bet 5 years from now, very few of us will own a lawnmower. Instead, we may not have a yard service, but we'll have somebody who will drop a lawnmower off for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon, all serviced, gassed up, ready to go, that we can use. Why should we own it and keep it in the garage? That's how these guys think. They don't want to own stuff. They don't want to buy prom dresses. They're happy to go online and rent a prom dress, rent an expensive handbag, etc. Those are the business models that are going to be driven by this generation's way of looking at the world. Improvise, share, recycle, regenerate. And so my suggestion is we call them the regeneration. Very different from the mindsets we've had up till now. And just a reminder, it's all different by every country. There aren't very many commonalities. In fact, if you look at boomers and traditionalists, I would say definitely start from scratch in every country. They're quite different. If you look at Xers and Ys and increasingly regens, you'll see more similarities because, of course, we are becoming more globally integrated. So there'll be more linkages there.